Hi everyone, it's Mr. Barden here. Today I'm going to be going over some of the basic concepts of sound and just the physics involved with that will be very helpful to go along with the programming digital media course and this sound unit that we will be starting, right now. So, in general, sound is sound. With that wonderfully phrased sentence, what I'm trying to get at is that the physics of sound don't really change. It's going to be the same regardless of whatever you're coding in, whatever you're trying to do. Unless something really weird happens with physics in the upcoming future, it's not really going to be very different. So, what sound is molecules in the atmosphere vibrating because of some energy source that made it passed along energy, made it vibrate, and then that'll cause them to move and bump into something to another molecule next to it. It can be a molecule of whatever, doesn't matter. But then that energy gets transferred to the new molecule, which then begins to move and vibrate, and that gets transferred to the next one that it bumps into, and so on and so forth. This means that you can have one sound source and then it will radiate sound out through this medium of the environment until it gets picked up by something and is then heard as a sound. This is a very long-winded way of saying that sound travels from the source through stuff. The speed at which it travels does vary. So if you're trying to send sound waves through something a lot more dense, like say steel, and I say a lot more dense in relation to air, then the sound waves will travel further, or I'm sorry, not further, quicker through the steel. But because it's denser, it'll also, not go as far. So it'll go quicker, but it'll die off faster at the same time. Whereas through air, because it'll move a little bit slower than through steel, but it'll travel a lot further because, again, it's less dense. The molecules can move farther. I've got on the screen here this chart that shows some of the approximate speeds of sound through different things. You probably have noticed that by this point, and you can see that as things get denser, that speed increases. But again, because a little bit of energy is lost every time those molecules bump into each other, that distance it can travel is a lot less. And then in space, because it's a vacuum, there's nothing to transfer that energy. There's just no sound. If you've ever heard the phrase from the old horror movies, in space no one can hear you scream. That kind of idea is just because there's no sound. Generally, when people say the speed of sound, they refer to it in air, and that's approximately 1,000 feet per second, or a little over 300 meters per second. Okay, so a few things to keep in mind. I've got this graphic right here that's showing you're hitting a drum, and that's the sound source. We're getting the energy going from our arm, boom, into the drum, and that causes the drum head to vibrate, and that causes the air molecules to vibrate, which then they bump into other ones, and so on and so forth. And the way that this is happening is that the molecules come in and they end up kind of bunching together in an area of high pressure and then bouncing off of each other to make an area of low pressure. And these waves of high and low pressure, that's what's going to be key in hearing a lot of this. So I've got another diagram here, a lot of diagrams on this page. That, again, is just kind of showing that we get from the sound source all the molecules that are kind of bunching up because they've all started moving and they bump into each other, and then these transfer the energy, and these ones move and bump into new ones, and so on. We get these waves of high and low pressure, and we can represent it with this wave form here, where when the peaks are up, it's high pressure. When it's down, it's low pressure, and the amount tells us how much. So as this travels from sound source to ear, or whatever's picking it up, this is what we call the frequency, and that is the times per second that these waves of alternating high and low pressure are hitting our ears. Humans can hear approximately 20 to 20,000 what we call hertz, times per second. In that frequency range. And that's approximate. Everyone is different, depending on the sound source. You may not hear a lot on the low end. As people get older, the higher end of their hearing range tends to fade off. So again, everyone is slightly different, but generally speaking, most humans hear between 20 and 20,000 hertz. Like always, I'll have a link to this textbook page in the description below so you can check out these videos. I'm not just going to play them, but I've got a handful of other resources. This page may need a little updating now that I'm thinking about it, but we'll get to that as we go. But I wanted to point out this link right here. It shows you just, a full sweep of the audio spectrum. So from 20 to 20,000 hertz, that full range, you'll be able to hear where does your particular hearing range start and stop? If we're talking about musical pitch, that is frequency as well. There's a little bit of math involved, but generally speaking, the way that it works is that the frequency can be anything in a sound, but specific ones, which I've got on this chart right here, can correspond to a pitch. So there's, all the musical pitches on an instrument you might know, and they have a particular frequency. So when you play this particular frequency, it happens to play that specific note. Is kind of how it works. So if you were to program things to only play certain frequencies on your digital instrument, then those would just be the notes that it plays. So you can use that to build scales and chords and things like that. The math behind it is that it's a logarithmic scale, exponents, all that kind of stuff. Basically, every time the octave increases, so if you started on C and then played a C above that, you would have doubled the frequency. So we'll get into that a little bit in more detail when we start actually making a synthesizer in this course. But just know that every time as you increase the pitch, the frequency is also increasing exponentially. All right, volume. So going back to this diagram right here, if the times per second that these waves hit your ear is the frequency of the sound, then broadly speaking, the size of the waves hitting your ear are the volume of the sound. And again, just broadly speaking, the louder the wave, the louder the sound. So again, if I'm going to be really quiet, because I don't even know if you can hear me, it's covered by my hand, so you can pluck it out more. That's going to be a lot more quiet than if I'm talking right here, really close to the mic, kind of loud, making a lot bigger air pressure waves with my voice. So again, the more powerful the waves, the larger the sound. There's some math involved. We're not going to worry about that right now. Keep in mind here that, certain volumes can be too loud. I've got this chart right here, which I think is pretty handy. And basically, anything pretty much above 100 decibels or so in terms of loudness, it can become painful. Like you can cause, harm to your hearing and just pain and potentially very bad damage to your ear and your ability to hear. So I just wanted to stress, 100 decibels, that's kind of like that threshold of pain where it starts to hurt. Underneath that, okay, it's a bit better. And then, most things are okay, but even prolonged listening at these, loud but not painful volumes can cause hearing damage. So I just want to bring this up because we are working with sounds that, again, take a break, louder isn't always better, that kind of thing. Don't hurt your ears. All right. If you follow along with my course instructions, you won't have any problems. All right, so the way humans hear a sound, we're almost done with the human and the physics and biology part, is that the sound waves are going to enter the ear. And I'm, again, briefly, going over this, and they get filtered through some bones and some drum head type flaps and we eventually get to this inner ear organ called the cochlea. So notice most of this is just inside of the head where you can't see it. This down here is a slightly better representation of the cochlea. It's all curled up on itself. And essentially what this does is this acts kind of like a filter in the sense. So sound waves are going to enter the organ and they're going to travel through and eventually they're going to get filtered out. This is because this is filled with some fluid and some receptors and other stuff that help to, again, filter out the sound, let that energy, stimulate different areas of this. So when certain frequencies are heard, it's going to stimulate some sensors in certain areas. So approximately 600 hertz versus 5,000 way down here on this other end. What is happening is these places getting stimulated are connected to nerves that go into your brain. And this is what lets people be able to tell the difference between a really low sound and a really high sound, because it's physically stimulating different nerves in your head. And that's what's going on there. So again, those sound waves enter your ears, travel through, stimulates different nerves in your brain. This is very different, but still related once we start getting into recording sounds and working in them with computers. So when we record a sound with a microphone is just an electronic ear. I've got on this page here a bunch of diagrams that go into a bit more detail, but again, a microphone, the sound waves are going to hit it, it's going to pick it all up, and pretty much all it does is instead of converting it into a nerve impulse, it converts it into electricity. And there are different kinds of microphones that do this in different ways. And again, we're not going to break all of that down, but it gets turned into electricity that gets sent down a cable to whatever else. Maybe you're just making it louder so you can hear it. Maybe you're recording it to play back later. Maybe you're saving it as a computer file. There's a whole bunch of stuff we can do. In order to record it so we can actually use it in this course, that's what I'm going to focus on. And to do that, we need to digitize the recording. So coming out of the microphone and down the cable, it's just raw electrical voltage. We need to actually do something to convert that into a file that the computer can read. So to do that, again, we make the sound pressure waves at the microphone converts it into electricity, and it sends it out down the cable. In the computer, if your computer has a microphone, then it has one of these circuits, but we have what's called the analog to digital converter. And this little piece of hardware, essentially what it does is it gets the incoming voltage and it looks at it and says, okay, that is, this much voltage. And then it looks at it a little bit later and says, oh, now we're at this much and this much and this much. And maybe now we're down here. And it varies. And it does that a lot of times, very, very quickly. Kind of the standard, like if you've ever gone back to, CDs and stuff, it's kind of the first digital audio format that really took off. I'm not going to go down that rabbit hole, but that standard is 44,100 times every single second. So very, very fast. The higher definition your audio, the higher that sample rate is. And I've seen it go as high as 96,000 times a second. But again, that makes a much bigger file size. So all the audio file is the computer with a little bit of formatting stuff added onto it, is just listing out the values of this electricity in order. So it's going to, as we're recording, it's reading all the levels, storing it as a number. Great. When we play them back in order, that's what helps us regenerate that sound. So again, I've kind of got some pictures here. That didn't make it any bigger at all on the screen. Oh, well. But you can see here that each of these blue dots is a sample. And it's just every so often in time, it looks at how much electricity, either positive or negative, just like those pressure wave forms that I mentioned earlier. And it just saves that value right there. What it saves them as is, again, just a number, and this is the bit depth, and that's essentially the options that the computer can have in order to save that as a number. So what I mean by that is that the electricity coming from here is just analog electricity. There's no numeric values. It's just the amount of electricity coming in. The computer has to turn it into a number because it can only work with ones and zeros. It can't do anything else. So it has defined in it a certain what I call resolution, I guess, the number of options we can put this electricity in. Kind of like, okay, we're looking at it. Okay, there's 7 electricity. We'll put this in the 7 bin. Now we've got 3. We'll put this in the 3 bin and the 14. And I don't know what to do with this one, but it's the closest to 12, so it's going in 12. And so on and so forth. So again, we have the input here in this picture. It's an analog signal, and you can see that as the bit depth increases, we get much more accurate in terms of options for placing those snapshots. So when things are super low bit, then it's going to sound very distorted and noisy and not quite right. But the higher definition, the more bits, the better the audio sounds, the more like the original we hear. Okay, so that's the majority of it. Again, the computer can take that, save it as a number, that gets saved as a file, and then the computer will read through it all in order, and it will actually send that audio out to some speakers so it can be amplified and we can actually hear it again. So that's the main idea. This next part is something that's we'll dive a little more into when we get into that section of videos. But as we start making these audio sounds and changing them and tweaking them, we can start thinking about this as a what I call a digital pathway. So we have the sound source, that being our recorded file now, and it's just a bunch of numbers. It's numbers, and we read through them in order. We need to make, we're always going to read through them from beginning to end, and it's going to be a constant stream of numbers while we do that. But we can change those numbers in many, many ways. And this is where the idea of digital audio effects come in. So if you have, plugins and things like that change how audio sounds, this is really all they're doing is we have this really long number file, and it's just an algorithm. So as you put in a number, it's, does something and spits out a new number. And that's all we're doing there. So we can change these sounds up. So maybe we add a reverb, and that's just going to, again, delay some sounds very, very shortly to make it sound like it's bouncing around off of a room. Again, it's just going to change those numbers up and keep outputting the stream until we can hear it. We have to have a constant stream of signal or of numbers moving from source to output for us to hear anything, because otherwise, again, it's just like in space. There's nothing to transfer the energy to. We can't hear it. So if there's nowhere to send the electricity to in here, or the numbers, we won't be able to hear it. This will become probably a little bit more clear as we start building up the programs in order to play back these sounds and work with that. At the very end of the signal, we have the opposite of our analog to digital converter, and this is the digital to analog converter. And what it does is it will receive a number from the computer and output an amount of voltage to match that. So as the numbers change from the computer and the effects and the pathway and whatever else we wanted to do to this sound file before we heard it, then it will change the amount of electricity coming through it. And that electricity gets sent to a speaker, which then, I won't go into the whole details of it, but it will push the air forward and back to then basically just simulate a sound source. So by pushing that air, it hears the source. In fact, if you have headphones of some kind, you could maybe lightly put your finger on the cup where the sound is coming out. You might be able to hear it vibrate a little bit if you kind of held your hands over a speaker on a computer or something, you might be able to feel some of those vibrations from the air coming out. I've got a video here that is showing that, again, the speaker is just pushing air. So they put paint on it. You can check that out. It's fun. This one, for some reason, this video keeps getting blocked, and I don't know why. I've replaced it like 4 times. I'm not going to hop into sound synthesis right now. This is basically just the idea of, instead of recording a sound, converting it into a number and saving it as a file on your computer, the computer is generating the numbers itself so we can hear it. So there's not a file, it's computer generated sound synthesis. So again, that's just a brief overview, some of the basics of the physics involved in just sounds in general, how the computer kind of works with them. As we go through these lessons over here on the left of the textbook, these concepts will become a little bit more clear. We'll dive into each one a little bit more. As always, I'll put the link to this page down in the description, so check it out. Check out some of those examples. It'll be nice and helpful for everyone, hopefully. And that's where I'm going to end it for right now. So I will see you all the next time that I see you. Bye.